kid.
This is a very special, really wild show because it's about animals we've never seen alive. Dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs have been extinct for 64 million years, but they ruled the Earth for the 100 million years before that, and that's 1,000 times longer than the human race has existed.
You can see dinosaur skeletons in museums all over the world, but bare bones are not enough for us because on this show we deal in real animals.
And dinosaurs were exactly that. Breathing, eating, smelling and snorting great reptiles, including the largest ever on land.
So, we're going to take you on a journey into the dinosaurs' world and bring them to life.
Looking at animals that are alive today.
Using some very heavy machinery, a few video effects, lifelike model animation,
And even using a few of you!
and I've come to Washington to meet some of the really big guys. It's an animal detective story that starts here at the Smithsonian Institution's Natural History Museum.
There are so many things that make up an animal. Size, shape, colour, movement, the noises it makes, what it feeds on and how it looks after its young. So turning a skeleton like this into a real living animal takes a lot of detective work, and with fossils the evidence is pretty thin.
Fossilised remains of dinosaurs have been found all over the world, buried under millions of years of earth and rock. Fossils tell us much about the ways in which the dinosaurs lived. The weather wears away the ground covering the fossils, and once discovered, the slow process of digging them out begins. It's like finding the jumbled up pieces of a huge jigsaw puzzle. Fossilised bones are incredibly fragile and can easily crumble into dust when they're removed from the earth, so they're wrapped in plaster before being taken away to laboratories for a closer look. In the last century, not many fossils were found, so the early fossil hunters knew very little about dinosaurs. For instance, they believed that the iguanodon looked a bit like a giant hippopotamus, but really it looks much more like a scaly kangaroo.
Dinosaurs came in all different shapes and sizes. In all, we know of over 400 different species, and they were all reptiles, like snakes and lizards. They were generally pretty big animals. For instance, the average dinosaur would be a lot bigger than me, and some, like this Diplodocus, were absolutely massive.
At 10 tons, Diplodocus weighed much more than an elephant, with a neck and tail that made the body 30 metres long.
Apatosaurus was even heavier. An adult weighed 30 tons and was 4 times taller than me.
The biggest dinosaur we've uncovered was called a Brachiosaurus. It weighed 75 tons, and like all the sauropods, it had a long neck and tail. In fact, its head was over 40 feet off the ground! 150 million years ago, the main plants were huge tree ferns and tough pines, so a long neck was vital for reaching the best vegetation at the top of the trees. An awfully long way off the ground. So, this is what the world would look like to a Brachiosaurus. And this is how a Brachiosaurus would look to the world. There's no animal on Earth built like this. It's twice the height of a giraffe and built like an elephant. And it's thought that these incredible animals lived in herds.
You can imagine the ground shaking under your feet as these huge animals thundered along.
But there were small dinosaurs too, and in this drawer is one of the smallest. It's called Compsognathus, and it's a dinosaur that's the size of a chicken. And this is what it probably looked like, a road runner. Its long legs and sharp claws are just like Compsognathus. It moves in the same way, with the tail for balance. But the dinosaur's tail had bones, not just feathers. So this is another dinosaur that's 50,000 times smaller than the Brachiosaurus.
These tiny bird-like dinosaurs must have spent most of their time trying to avoid being squashed by their gigantic neighbours.
So, how did the huge animals move around? This is the kind of tracks they left. And lots of different fossilised trackways have been found, left in the mud at the edges of lakes and rivers. Hi. The first thing you notice about this footprint is it's enormous. How long is it?
1 metre.
1 metre long, and how wide?
8 centimetres.
80 centimetres wide. Well, that's huge. And when you look at the spacing between these footprints, you can see that the animal was walking. Back right, back left, front right, front left, and they're evenly spaced. It's thought that these animals were so heavy that they needed 2 of their 4 feet on the ground all the time, just holding up their weight. So all they can do is walk.
This is what the foot of a 70-ton sauropod looked like. The toes are spread out into a soft, flat, round cushion. And you can see the toenails, the stubby toenails, here at the front. Elephants, like these African elephants, had the same problem as the dinosaurs had, and that is supporting weight. So they've got these long, thick pillars of legs. When elephants have to move fast, they can't trot or gallop. They have to keep their legs straight. So it's a quick march.
Dinosaur tracks are narrow, which proves a very important but pretty boring thing. The dinosaurs stood with their legs directly underneath their body. Now birds do it, we do it, but modern reptiles don't. This leopard gecko of Gemma's here has its legs sprawling out to the sides, and that makes it a very inefficient mover. Okay, Gemma, just put it down and we'll see how it moves. See? Look, it just scuttles along. Look at it scuttling along. It's moving its tail as well as its legs. But some dinosaurs could move as well as modern mammals. A galloping horse has only 1 foot on the ground at a time, but it can move really fast. And the tracks it leaves are completely different from the sauropods. You can see that the prints aren't regular, and that's because the horse was galloping. Now, in the later part of the dinosaur age, the Cretaceous period, there were 4-legged dinosaurs that could gallop.
Like this dinosaur, Monoclonius, a mighty beast weighing about 3 tons. That horn on the end of its nose must have been a pretty formidable weapon. Its body was heavily built like a rhino, and when they need to, rhinos can gallop at an incredible 40 kilometers an hour. It's pretty scary stuff when you see these two charging towards you. These fossilised dinosaur tracks are different again. Made by a large bipedal dinosaur, one that stood upright, like Compsognathus, and walked on 2 legs. This lizard uses its frill to warn off potential predators. If this doesn't work, it runs away. But look at its thin legs on either side of its body. They're not ideal for running fast. However, bipedal dinosaurs had strong legs underneath their bodies. Their feet had very elastic tendons, which made them much better runners.
And these feet are exactly the same, with 3 toes pointing out at an angle. So there's every chance that these rayas, birds from South America, are almost exactly the same as small bipedal dinosaurs.
So there are modern-day dinosaurs. like this flightless cassowary from New Guinea, reckoned to be one of the world's most dangerous birds. It's a big bird too, the largest may be 2 metres tall, weighing as much as a Great Dane. It has an extra long, sharp toe, which it uses as a weapon, leaping feet first at its opponent. They need to eat loads of fallen fruit to keep such a large body going. It's also got really sharp quills on the end of its short wings, which it can use for defence and also attack.
So, dinosaurs were the first animals ever to stand upright. But what advantage was that? Well, it means they could reach for food off the ground, their eyes were higher so they could spot predators and prey, and they were very agile. Okay, off you go!
Another great advantage of standing on 2 legs that has been vital for us humans is that we don't use our arms for walking on. And that's enabled us to develop these, hands. Our hands are perfectly designed. Early man used them for making and using tools and weapons and sewing materials for clothes. Now these are the bones of a dinosaur's hands. Compared to ours, dinosaur hands were simple in design but good for grasping. Look how these South American macaws here are able to cling to the sheer face of this cliff to feed. You won't see many modern reptiles eating like this macaw, but its feet are the closest thing to a bipedal hunting dinosaur's hands that we've got today. They're not as good as ours, but they're perfectly good enough to hold Brazil nuts like this, and they hold their food in much the same way as the dinosaur's hands would have held their prey. If you look at them closely, you can see they've got those long claws, tough skin under the foot, and the toes which close on each other from an opposite direction, something that only the most developed dinosaurs had.
And they used them for digging around or catching food. A clutch of dinosaur eggs was easy meat.
So, now we know how they moved, and the next question is, what did they eat? Well, you may think that dinosaurs were all fierce, dangerous carnivores, but as in any other natural system, most of them were vegetarians, and we know that the Diplodocus here was by its teeth. These chompers could have only been used for raking in vegetation. But just look at the size of the head. It's only the same size as the horse's, yet the body's much bigger than an elephant's. Now, we know that elephants spend all day eating, sometimes as much as 40 kilos a day. So how does Diplodocus get enough food through that tiny mouth to keep this massive body going?
Well, at the end of the neck was a huge muscular stomach, full of stones like these, found inside a dinosaur and worn smooth by grinding vegetation. Sparrows and other seed-eating birds swallow grit to do exactly the same thing as these huge dinosaurs. The system meant that sauropods could bite and grind their food at the same time.
Hadrosaurs developed much more efficient plant-crushing teeth in the cheek. So what they did was they ripped up vegetation with this horny beak here, and then they passed it back along the battery of teeth, ending up in the cheek. Special chewing teeth like these are something plant-eating mammals have, but modern reptiles don't.
But these are killer's teeth, and when it came to predators, the dinosaurs were the masters. This is the skull of Tyrannosaurus rex, the biggest land carnivore ever. And if you just look at those teeth, you can see they're long, they're curved, and they're serrated. The serration helped them cut up the meat. Now, the skull is literally packed with muscle, and it had a devastating bite.
Some scientists think that Tyrannosaurus rex kept rancid meat and grease from prey trapped between its teeth, just as these Komodo dragons do. One bite inflicts massive infection of the wound, and if the prey escapes, it will soon be weakened by deadly bacteria. It's then tracked down and finished off.
Tyrannosaurus was a massive animal, 10 times bigger than any modern carnivore. It stood upright and weighed 7 tons.
So this is how big Tyrannosaurus was, standing 18 feet, that's 5.5 meters tall, with a head that's 1.5 meters long. It was the biggest of a whole family of dinosaurs called carnosaurs, and they're all armed with these dagger-like teeth. And it may have been that they never actually had to kill their prey at all. They simply frightened off the other carnivores and ate theirs. I mean to say, would you hang around with something like this in the neighborhood?
It's likely that the most dangerous hunting dinosaur wasn't Tyrannosaurus, but a smaller, faster, pack-hunting animal like this Deinonychus here. Now, Deinonychus has very long, powerful legs for running and a stiff tail which it used as a rudder, but it also rested on that when it thrashed out with its feet. It did that because it had claws like this. It's 12 centimetres long and very sharp, and also hinged because it was held up like this when Deinonychus was running, but flicked down like this with a lot of force when it attacked. Deinonychus probably struck just like these kangaroos, but armed with 12 centimetre claws. Pack hunting made cornering prey much easier, so Deinonychus was a really fearsome predator. Modern carnivores, like these lions, hunt in much the same way as Deinonychus and other pack-hunting dinosaurs. Hunting as a team is much more successful than hunting alone. There is plenty of food, but it has to be shared. The lions stalk their prey and select the weakest of the herd as the victim.
When we're surrounded by things less than 100 years old, it sounds pretty daft to say that the world was very different 100 million years ago. But it was. Completely different.
Today, this desert in America looks pretty sparse, but millions of years ago it was nothing like this. It was dense forest and swampland, an ideal home for dinosaurs. How do we know this? Well, these are the fossilized remains of gigantic primitive conifer trees. Over the years, they have been turned into enormous gemstones of purples, greens, and reds. These fossil ferns here show that the climate was warm and wet. So the dinosaur landscape may have looked something like this. All the continents were joined together at that time in one supercontinent called Pangaea. The weather was stable and the land was rich with lush vegetation, such as cycads, horsetails, dracophyllum and primeval tree ferns.
And in the Jurassic period, there were no birds and only tiny, insignificant mammals. But in the skies and the seas, there were reptiles.
This sea monster is a plesiosaur. Plesiosaurs grew up to a staggering 17 meters long, with a huge barrel-like body. Like seals and sea lions today, they were efficient hunters. They ruled the seas. Their agility in the water allowed them to compete with large fish and sharks to catch a variety of marine life, such as fish and squid. There were also ammonites, which plesiosaurs cracked open with sharp, needle-like teeth. They had massive flippers, shaped like a turtle's, so that they could come ashore.
It may be that, like turtles, plesiosaurs had to return to the land to lay eggs, just like their reptile ancestors did. But that certainly wasn't the case for this reptile here. It's an ichthyosaur, perfectly designed for life in the water. And that shape is pretty familiar too.
Ichthyosaurs were the reptile equivalent of dolphins. Outstanding swimmers, totally committed to life in the water and never coming onto the land.
And here's the proof, this extraordinary fossil that shows an ichthyosaur that seems to have died while giving birth to live young under the water. And that's exactly what dolphins and killer whales do.
Dolphins are born tail first and are pushed to the surface of the water by their mothers to take their first breath. Meanwhile, from the skies swooped huge flying reptiles, plucking fish from the waves. This is Dimorphodon from the early Jurassic period. Its arms are wings covered in a fine membrane, just like a bat's. The most important group were the pteranodons, and they flew about during the Jurassic period. Now, the smallest one was just sparrow size, but the largest had a 7-metre wingspan. Enormous. Both the wing of the microlite and the pteranodon have got one central strut running down here. Now, in this case, it's an aluminium tube. In the case of the animal, it's a finger. Also, this tough plastic covering compares very favourably with the taut skin on the animal's wing. And to steer it, all you do is shift the weight and change the wing angle. The only difference is the engine.
They use the crib, just like albatrosses. The generator, yes, will live, only flapping their wings, maneuver themselves after takeoff. In this microlite, we've got a very much pterosaur wing, long and thin. It generates a lot of lift. We also need the engine to help us along a bit.
But probably the last thing a pterosaur needed was an engine. The biggest pterosaur was Quetzalcoatlus, with a wingspan the same as this microlite's.
There was another primitive aviator around with the pterosaurs. Now this is the fossil of an Archaeopteryx, and it might look like the fossil of any small dinosaur, but there's a difference. They've got wings and feathers, and it probably looked something like this. The first bird, and the start of a line that eventually replaced the pterosaurs. Now today, of course, there are thousands of different species of birds, but they're all direct descendants of this, the first bird dinosaur.
This Hoatzin from the jungles of South America has much in common with Archaeopteryx. It's not very good at flying. It can just about make it from one tree to another. The Hoatzin has another primitive characteristic, a clawed wing, found only on the young. The chicks use these to climb around the nest and also to escape from predators, and this may give us some clues as to how the early bird dinosaurs may have moved around the trees. Hoatzins have a special gut above their stomach, in which they start to digest the fibrous plants they eat.
135 million years ago were huge dinosaurs on the land, plesiosaurs down there in the sea, and pterosaurs up there in the skies. The Earth was slowly changing shape, but then something really big happened. Flowers.
The land was covered with new shapes and colours. Flowers are complex plants, yet they spread very quickly. The reason they were so successful is because of a novel method of pollination. They use animals for spreading their seeds.
They had softer leaves, and they produced fruit and tubers. So there was much more food at ground level. But the plant eaters had to eat with their heads facing downwards, and that could be very dangerous when Tyrannosaurus was around.
They needed protection. Armour is one form, and by growing plates of bone under the skin, animals can become armoured too. But armour's heavy and takes a lot of energy to heave around, so armoured animals are slow.
We've seen that the image of dinosaurs as slow, lumbering animals just isn't true. But there were some dinosaurs with really heavy armour.
The ankylosaurs.
The ankylosaurs were plant eaters with wide mouths for grazing low vegetation, and they were very heavily armoured. Some species even had armoured eyelids. They had plates of bone underneath the skin which stretched all the way across the back and then down the sides to form a skirt, just like this. So by squatting down, the skirt reached the ground, and there was no way a predator could reach the soft parts underneath.
An armadillo is a small-scale equivalent. When it curls up, every square inch is armoured.
Armour is no good on its own. You need an offensive weapon too. The ankylosaur's tail was stiffened with rods right the way down to the end, where there were two huge lumps of bone. I suppose it was a bit like a mallet, and it swung it from side to side. It was that powerful, it could break a dinosaur's leg.
Triceratops had the ideal solution, a defensive horn and enough speed to escape. But another very successful group, the hadrosaurs, had no obvious defence at all.
In comparison to the ankylosaurs and triceratops, the hadrosaurs were defenceless, and yet they were one of the biggest and most successful of the dinosaur groups. So, how did they defend themselves against Tyrannosaurus and the rest?
There's another very effective way of protecting yourself from predators, and that's by staying in large groups, safety in numbers. Now these are pink-footed geese, and there must be thousands of them in this flock. And they have much the same problem as the later plant-eating dinosaurs, such as the hadrosaurs, and that is that they have to eat with their heads down. But as you see, there's always some geese with their heads up, keeping an eye open. If they spot a danger, then the lookouts honk. And if that's not enough to deter the predator, then they'll all fly off. Which is something the dinosaurs couldn't do.
Hadrosaurs even looked like geese. They had a beak for cropping low vegetation. But one of the most interesting points was this crest here, and it's thought that it was used as a sound chamber.
The crest was hollow, like a trombone, so the lookouts could make a loud alarm call. Gibbons used resonating sacs to amplify their calls, and so did some hadrosaurs.
It's very likely that the dinosaurs were bright colours. Modern reptiles have scaly skins which are a mass of different colours. Browns, yellows and greens for camouflage, but bright oranges, reds, whites and blues for display.
This butterfly can't see this chameleon. And that's because these reptiles have the ultimate means of camouflage. They can change their colour to match their surroundings. The prey doesn't know the chameleon is there until it's only a tongue's length away.
So the hunting dinosaurs may well have been camouflaged, but the communicators, like the hadrosaurs, would have been as bright as any modern lizard.
Dinosaurs also have a reputation for small brain size and stupidity, but in fact the small bipedal hunting dinosaurs had a brain the same size as an equivalent-sized bird today, and certainly bigger than a modern reptile. In fact, the dinosaurs may have even been warm-blooded, with fur and feathers. And with their long legs and their light bones, they were very fast-moving animals. And one group, the ornithomimasaurs, bird mimics, had skeletons very similar to these modern flightless birds. And if you watch an ostrich beating along, it's a very fast animal.
And an ostrich dinosaur would have run like this. Incredibly fast at up to 70 kilometres an hour.
And we even know something about the family life of dinosaurs. Now, they were reptiles, so they laid eggs. And this is the biggest dinosaur egg. And it belonged to a sauropod called Hypsilosaurus. And it's a staggering 304 millimetres long and 254 millimetres across. And it holds 3.3 litres, which is about 60 hen's eggs, or 10 times the size of the largest modern reptile egg. Now, this is about the biggest that a reptile egg could be. Any bigger and the shell would burst, and if the shell was any thicker, then the baby animal couldn't get out.
Most reptiles leave their eggs in the sand to hatch. Crocodiles are about the most careful reptile parents, but some dinosaurs went much further, as scientists discovered in 1978 at a lakeside in Montana.
Here in Washington is one of the actual skeletons of a baby myosaur found in Montana. Basically, it's the same as the adults. It hasn't got its duck bill yet, it has a proportionally larger skull and a bigger eye, and then it has longer and thinner back legs. Now, it's about 1 metre long, but it would have taken 6 months to grow to this size, and it would have spent all of that time living in the nest, being fed on a diet of plants and berries by its parents.
The Montana find showed that some of the hadrosaurs nested in colonies, just like birds do, and they even scraped up a nest cup, just like these flamingos. Both the nests are mounds of earth, carefully spaced 2 neck lengths apart. So 70 million years ago, a lakeside hadrosaur colony may have looked just like this. Some of the species produced very active young, ready to run around from their very first day, whilst others took much longer to develop. Now, the hadrosaurs were slow developers, and they fed their young in the nest, much like birds do. Parental care like this is quite rare amongst reptiles. Most simply lay their eggs in the sand and leave them to develop.
Dinosaurs were very sophisticated animals, more like birds and mammals than reptiles, but 64 million years ago, 70% of all life became extinct. There are several theories as to why this happened, but the real reason is still a mystery. If we look at the Earth over millions of years during the time of the dinosaurs, we can see that the continents as we know them were shifting and changing their shapes dramatically. The collision of these land masses created new places to live. Such changes brought problems for the dinosaurs, and one theory suggests that diseases began to spread amongst newly formed dinosaur populations. If this wasn't enough, periods of intense volcanic activity caused by the cracking of the Earth's crust sent rivers of molten rock, some 2,000 degrees centigrade, from the heart of the planet over the land, destroying habitats and creating new landscapes in their wake. Meanwhile, the sea itself was changing, and new oceans like the Atlantic were being formed. The dinosaurs were forced to adapt to a series of rapid changes, and some, like the sauropods, were less able to cope than others. Extreme changes in sea levels would have upset the coastal landscapes. Rivers ran through deserts, and on their banks, plants thrived. Weather patterns were disrupted, and it got cooler. The larger dinosaurs relied on a warm, stable climate to maintain a healthy temperature. A series of prolonged cold nights would have drained them of vital body heat, which could not be replaced, and so they died. Their death would affect the entire food chain. So shifting continents and the changes this made to the climate and landscape may have contributed to the extinction of many groups of dinosaurs. And then something of truly astronomical proportions happened. The most likely theory is that a meteor, bigger than Mount Everest and travelling 40 times faster than Concorde, struck the Earth, causing havoc. Violent earthquakes, huge tidal waves, and devastating fireballs followed. Meteors had struck the Earth before, during the dinosaur age, but the dinosaurs had managed to survive. However, the world was different now. It had become a difficult place for them to live, and this meteor collision may have been the last straw for these now vulnerable creatures. Scientists are divided as to where the meteor crater might be and what the exact long-term effects of the collision were, but it is probable that the weather patterns were thrown into chaos for years, which destroyed not only the dinosaurs but many other forms of life. Today, 64 million years later, there are survivors, such as alligators, turtles, insects, small mammals, and this, the tuatara from New Zealand, the oldest living relative of rhynchosaurs and thecodonts, the primitive reptiles which the dinosaurs evolved from. Some people believe the smaller bipedal dinosaurs didn't die out, but evolved into birds. Their evolution was already heading towards a lighter skeleton, a larger brain, warm blood, and even feathers. The discovery of blood-sucking insects trapped and preserved in the sticky amber from trees has enabled us to isolate DNA, the chemical in your body that makes you the person you are. In the film, Jurassic Park, scientists cloned dinosaurs from the strands of DNA found in mosquito stomachs. Although this is improbable, these amber fossils give us clues about prehistoric life. Dinosaurs were incredibly successful, living 30 times longer on Earth than we have. They were intelligent, highly evolved and diverse animals, from ferocious carnivores to huge plant-eating sauropods, and tiny dog-sized dinosaurs. So, our detective story ends. But there's lots more evidence to be found, so perhaps you might be the dinosaur detectives of the future. But that's not all. One thing we know for sure. Now the dinosaurs were gone, there was a big gap left in the animal world, and that left plenty of room for these. Mammals. And that includes you and me. But that's another story.